Hello everyone. So in this video I just want to discuss the concept of death, right? Just a general mind map of how I have come to think of it and how I see it, and just in general what actually happens, right? I just want to start by considering water, right? Water, and it's in all its forms actually, right? From its solid state, it decomposes if you raise its temperature. If it's ice, maybe you raise its temperature to a certain degree, it transforms to liquid water. Alright. But let's just focus on liquid water, right? How would you, let's say you're trying to kill water, what would you do? How would you kill water? You'd boil it. You'd increase its temperature to a certain degree, whereby after a certain time, if you had water in a container, it will be all gone. So you could say it's dead. It's all gone from that container. But what actually happened to the water? Because we all know it's just like common sense to say that, all right, it's not dead, right? It just transformed. It is now not liquid and it's not gaseous. It's a gas now. It just transformed. And if you would expose that gas to lower temperatures, it will then reappear again in the liquid form. So it's basically a cycle. Water, you can't kill water. We all understand that. It is obvious. It is just standard, right? Which is interesting because first thing is that humans are 60% water, right? Okay, can say maybe infants are 75% water. Humans can range between 50 to 65% water, depending on age, body size, and gender, depending on composition of other elements like protein and lipids, which is fats, minerals, and so on, nucleic acids and stuff like that, right? So we've established that water doesn't die. We can't kill water. We can just transform it from a state, one state to another state. All right. So if you're looking at a human body, which is 60% water, can even say 50, whatever the case may be, but generally average, I think we can rest at 60% water. That's the body, right? So what happens when we actually, a human dies? For now, we're just focusing on the material element of the human, the body. Okay, we are gonna go into the other part, the animating part, the energy or the spirit or consciousness, right? So when we say the body has died, I think from the logic of what happens to water, we can assume that, all right, it doesn't really die. It just merely transforms. It decomposes. It changes form. There's like proteins. If you increase the heat and maybe the pH levels, it also changes form. You know, so everything basically, everything kind of like recycles, right? And there isn't nothing ceases to exist basically in the material world, according to the law of conservation of mass, right? Mass is conserved at all times. It just changes form. It just changes. There's decomposition. There's recycling. There's regeneration. So that is the cycle of the physical composition of a human being. So on that level, in a sense of death being ceasing to exist, I think it doesn't play out to be death. It is merely a transformation in form. I think that is the best way to look at the the human body dying, it is transforming, mainly just transforming from one form to other forms based on the makeup of those particular parts that make up the human body. All right. So yeah, just that is an interesting way to look at it, at death in the physical sense. But then we can argue that, all right then, but humans are made out of consciousness and the body. All right. So consciousness is interesting. The reason I talk about this topic though is I think I'm gonna get to that point later. Let me just continue then with the thought process of something that just hit me, right? So with the consciousness, with the energy, with the spirit part of the human, I think we can all agree that that is what animates the body. That is what gives it life, right? I do not think it's the other way around. It wouldn't make any sense if you think about it. I think the consciousness is what makes everything happen, keeps the body alive, right? So what happens to the consciousness? Okay, the body transforms, decays, and becomes part of earth, or whatever the case may be, or whatever element that you are looking at specifically in the body. It does different things, but it all leads to a change in form. That's all that happens with the material part of a human being. So if you're looking at the spiritual part of the human being, or the consciousness of the human being, we can all agree that nobody knows exactly what that is to the core, right? But if you apply the very same laws, like what you say with the body, with the mass, with the law of conservation of mass, we can easily explain. And also, like as we started with the water, like it just changes form. Everybody understands that okay, now with all the water, have changed its temperature, it has expanded, it is just changing form. So it's easy to understand with the body, right? So the problem comes in with the consciousness, with the spirit, because nobody really understands what that is to the core. But then the beauty of these laws is that the laws of the universe, that is, that they kind of help us get a slight peek of the other side of things that we don't understand. The law of as above, so below. I think it is very important to think of laws like that if you wanna get a slight understanding of other elements like consciousness, because to think that alright, the body doesn't die, it transforms and it continues living in another form, why then would you just now assume that alright, but the consciousness dies, it ceases to exist? Well, nothing else that is observable in our reality, or even not observable, can be said to have ceased to exist. Right. So I think it wouldn't be smart to just say, all right, fine, we understand the body does not really die in the sense of ceasing to exist, but then the spirit, the consciousness, that we can just say it's dead, it has ceased to exist. Like, how can we conclude that, especially when knowing that we don't even understand it, and it is more sophisticated than the body? I think we can all agree to that. And ceasing to exist will mean that we are reducing it to even, we're making it seem lower than material, because even material doesn't just cease to exist. And we would not be applying the laws that we have at hand that help us understand the phenomena of everything, right? So what actually happens with the spirit? What can we kind of think? How can we think through the process of the spirit part of things, right? Let's take other practical examples, right? I'm gonna just make two examples, right? First, I'm gonna make an example with electricity and a light bulb, right? If you have an electricity, or if you have a light bulb, it emits light, transform electricity into light, right? So we can say that the body in that example is the actual light bulb, and the electricity is the animating force, the spirit in that unit, right? But what happens when the light bulb decomposes, let's say it just stops working? Does the electricity cease to exist? We all know, obviously, no, it's because we understand electricity, right? It's not as complicated as consciousness, human consciousness. We know that, all right, the electricity will continue to exist, and if you replace that light bulb with another one that is functional, and the same electricity will flow through that light bulb, and it will be a working light bulb which will be emitting light again. So we know that electricity doesn't die. When the unit of light bulb emitting light stops to work, dematerializes in whatever sense, right? Another example of two parts forming a unit that also might seem very obvious, but I think these examples really help with what the point I'm trying to make here. If you look at a car and the driver, right, both parts are vital in making the unit work, right? The car won't go anywhere without the driver, the animating force, all right? So if a car won't go anywhere without the animating force, what happens then when the car reach its end? It's now being driven to the scrapyard for the last time. It's parked there. It'll never drive again. It is a material body that is no longer useful. We can't assume that means the human being that drove that car has ceased to exist. Logically, because we can see that, all right, the human being just gets out of the car and goes away, and he might just walk, or he might get into another car and drive that car. So in that sense, in that example, we can actually see what the animating spirit of the car and human being unit does. It leaves the first body, the animating spirit, which is the human being in this example, leaves this body, which is the old car that is no longer fit to continue in the journey for whatever reasons, and it continues in its life. And if it still wants to travel the planet or the world, that animating spirit, the human, will then get into another car and continue traveling. All right. This goes back to now as below, so above. If you think about things, you have to understand that things just work. It's cyclical. It's similar. It's in God makes humans in His image. And humans think it's mine. It's just like, it kind of like almost. It seems simple, but I think it is. It is simple. It is. That's just how it kind of works, right? So if you're coming back to a human being, and the body being the car in the case, and the spirit being the animator, the driver, why then would we assume in that case all of a sudden all these basic laws like energy cannot be destroyed, it just transforms or just changes from one form to another, doesn't apply there anymore, just because we have not fully grasped what consciousness is? It is still a form of energy. I think we can agree on that. It is still a form of energy. So why would we say it ceases to exist? Where in any example that we have that we can look at, that is not a thing. Nothing ceases to exist completely. Like that is just like, so that it really helps us look at death in a different way, you know, because the animating spirit of the human, we can assume just behaves like any other animating spirit. No, it either takes another form, another body, and or it can either continue existing because you don't need a body, just like a human doesn't really need a car to exist. They use it, and if it's reached its end of usefulness, they can get another one, or they cannot have a car and just exist as a human. It is because they are the animation, they are the mind behind all of it, right? So yeah, man, that is interesting. And then this just really helped me understand personally. For me, that made sense, and it made me understand better the concept of death, because yeah, there are teachings that are like death is the end, like you cease to exist. Like then it comes back to saying exactly what is the more important, what is the okay, not important, let's not use important, but there are two elements to a human, right? If you say cease to exist, we already established the body doesn't cease to exist, it transforms to other forms. So you are implying that the spirit ceases to exist. But in any other animation and body example that we have, we are certain that the animation doesn't cease. The electricity in the case of a light bulb doesn't cease to exist. You can change the light bulb and it will work, continue to work through the light bulb. A human driving a car, once that car is no longer useful, the human can just drive a different car. As above, so below. So even the spirit of the human being, I don't think it would be wise for us to assume that it ceases to exist after the human body has reached its end, in a sense of being a human body. It does not reach its end in a sense of existing, but it has reached its end in the sense of being a useful human body. It's no longer doing that, and there's no longer its function. It does other functions, whether it's becoming part of the earth or whatever the case may be. And then the spirit that animated it, I think it would be flawed to think that it ceases to exist just because we don't understand it, whereby other elements we can just obvious it's so obvious to us that the electricity doesn't die, the driver of a car doesn't cease to exist just because the body of the car has died. He leaves, gets out of that car and continues living and can get into another car, and that unit of car human continue becomes alive again with a different car. So yeah, with the teachings that really made me think of this, because there are teachings that say when a human being, means the composition of the spirit in the body, and its existence as a unit, that means a person. Then that means death. That means nothing else happens after that. Something ceases, and I think that is not a good view, and it is very kind of like very limited way to think about that. And we can only conclude, right, with the information and the fact that we have. But I find it very hard to reach the conclusion that consciousness ceases to exist after a human does what we call death. So it's a very interesting topic, right? So yeah, I'm of the belief that the spirit does not cease to exist; it continues. Therefore, the concept of death being an end for a human being, and especially for the spirit side of the human being, the consciousness side of the human being, I think that it definitely does continue to exist, as much as we do not understand how and where it goes and all that, but the evidence is overwhelming and is in support of it definitely surviving and going on, because I don't think the cycle ends there. So this came to me actually as a thought of other teaching. There are teaching out there that teach, whether they're scientific, teach that it ceases to exist, and other religious that teach that death is the end of that human, which is there's literally the only way the only thing to support that is that because we don't know what it is, and that's it. But not us not knowing also does not is not proof enough that it ceases to exist. You see, and someone can also say that it's also not proof enough that because we don't know that it continues. But like everything else that we can look at shows that it's not accurate. No, I don't know of any example of anything that has animation and material that the animator of the material ceases to exist just because the material fails in some sort of way or decomposes. So as using the law where we aware of conservation, it doesn't add up. It really falls short. So yeah, those teachings. I was raised with the belief that a human being dies completely and that's it. And I believed that for a while, for a very long while, until I was introduced to the laws of the universe. Until I just decided to be somebody who thinks for himself, and that concept deteriorated so rapidly to me as I applied my own mind, and I've reached this conclusion that I'm sharing here right now with you guys, which is quite interesting. I thought I'd just share that. I'd like to know what you guys think and what conclusions you've reached regarding this. And yeah, that was all for this video. So that is my understanding of death. It is just a change. It's just a change in existence. And I believe that human is more of the spiritual than the body. So I'm saying I've reached the conclusion that a human continues living after what we call clinical death in the human sense, in the sense of the body spirit unit. So yeah, let me know what you think about the topic. That was all from me, Lodi, out.